It starts the same way for so many people. Not with a fight, not with betrayal, but with silence. A silence so sharp it feels personal. One day they were warm, watching you, leaning in, texting back fast enough to make you feel chosen. Their eyes softened when you spoke, their body relaxed around you. You could feel it. Something real was happening. And then, almost without warning, the air changed. Their replies shortened, their affection turned strange, their warmth became hesitation, their closeness became distance, and you were left standing in the emotional wreckage, trying to understand how someone who seemed so deeply affected by you could suddenly treat you with coldness, confusion, even cruelty. And what hurts the most is not just the distance, it is the contradiction. Because if they never cared, this would be easier. If they were always detached, always disinterested, always half gone, your nervous system would stop searching for meaning. But that is not what happened. They let you feel them. They let you touch the deeper part. They gave you glimpses, and then they punished you with withdrawal. That is the part no one prepares you for. Sometimes the avoidant does not treat you badly because they feel nothing. Sometimes they treat you badly because they feel too much. That truth is hard to hold when you are the one lying awake at night, replaying every message, every pause, every shift in their tone. It is hard to believe when they left you on red, acted annoyed by your needs, or made you feel ashamed for asking for basic reassurance. It is hard to believe when your love was met with emotional static. But the deeper the feeling goes in someone who is wired to fear dependence, the more their system can interpret love as danger. Not consciously, not elegantly, but biologically. To love someone for an avoidant is not always calming. It can be activating, threatening, disorganizing. The closer they feel to you, the less control they feel inside themselves. And that is the brutal truth most people do not want to face. The more you chased clarity from someone who was overwhelmed by attachment, the more you became the mirror they wanted to escape. Not because your love was too much, but because it touched the exact place they spend their life protecting. You thought your consistency would soothe them. You thought if you stayed gentle enough, patient enough, understanding enough, they would finally feel safe and come closer. But sometimes your softness does not melt their defenses. Sometimes it exposes them. Sometimes it makes them feel seen in a way that strips them of the emotional distance they rely on to function. And when an avoidant feels exposed, they do not always say, "I am scared." They say, "You are too much." They say, "I need space." They say, "Why are you making this such a big deal?" They say nothing at all. Because for someone with avoidant wiring, attachment can trigger the same systems that are meant to protect them from danger. Their amygdala starts reading closeness as a loss of control. Their nervous system shifts into defense. Cortisol rises. The body prepares not for intimacy, but for escape. And dopamine, the chemical that made the connection feel exciting in the beginning, starts mixing with fear. So now the person who brought relief also brings activation. The person they want is the same person their body has started bracing against. That is why the shift feels so brutal. They are not just pulling away from you, they are pulling away from what you awaken in them. And if they have spent years training themselves not to need, not to rely, not to feel too deeply, love itself can feel like an invasion. Not because it is unhealthy, not because you are asking for something unreasonable, but because real intimacy starts dissolving the emotional armor they built to survive. So when they care, really care, it can get ugly. They become colder right when they are feeling more. They become dismissive right when they are becoming attached. They become harder to reach right when they are thinking about you the most. That is the paradox. And this is where so many people lose themselves, because you mistake the paradox for a puzzle you are meant to solve. You become more patient, more available, more emotionally fluent. You start wording your pain perfectly, hoping if you say it gently enough they will stop running. You explain. You reassure. You shrink your needs into something almost invisible just to avoid scaring them. And without realizing it, you begin abandoning yourself in the exact moment you are trying to be loved. This is where the cycle feeds on you. Because the more dysregulated you become, the more you reach. The more you reach, the more overwhelmed they feel. The more overwhelmed they feel, the more detached they become. And then their detachment intensifies your panic, which makes you reach harder, explain longer, wait deeper, hurt quieter. Until one day you are no longer asking, "Why are they acting like this?" You are asking, "Why do I still want someone who makes me feel this small?" That question changes everything. Because now we are no longer just talking about them. We are talking about the part of you that confuses being emotionally deprived with being deeply bonded. We are talking about the addiction hidden inside uncertainty. We are talking about how intermittent affection can light up the reward system so intensely that your body begins mistaking relief for love. A delayed text becomes a drug. A brief moment of warmth after days of distance feels euphoric. One vulnerable confession from them can erase 10 acts of emotional absence in your mind. Not because you are weak, but because your nervous system starts organizing around the hope of reconnection. And hope, when it is attached to inconsistency, becomes a trap. This is why the core concept is not closure. It is silence. Not their silence. Yours. The silence that stops explaining your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. The silence that does not perform pain in the hope of finally being chosen. The silence that is not punishment, not strategy, not manipulation, but self-respect. Because when you are dealing with an avoidant who does care, your emotional reactivity often becomes the thing that protects them from having to feel the full weight of losing you. As long as you are still reaching, they do not have to face absence. As long as you are still explaining, they do not have to confront what their defenses have cost them. As long as you are still available on command, your presence remains psychologically guaranteed, even if your heart is breaking. But silence changes the chemistry of the dynamic. When you stop chasing, the nervous system on both sides has nowhere to hide. Yours starts shaking first. That is important to understand. Silence will not feel empowering at the beginning. It will feel like withdrawal. It will feel like dying with your eyes open. Your body will beg you to send one more message just to regulate the uncertainty, just to get some sign, just to know they still care. That urge is not always intuition. Sometimes it is your nervous system trying to escape the void by re-entering the cycle. Stay still, because something powerful happens when you do. The avoidant, who was once soothed by your predictability, begins to feel the absence they thought they wanted. The space they demanded no longer feels clean and liberating. It starts echoing. The distractions stop working as well. The busyness fades at night. They reach for their phone and notice you are not there in the same way. They remember your energy not when you were chasing, but when you were simply present. They replay the softness they dismissed. They feel the loss not as drama, but as emptiness. And emptiness is harder to blame on you. This is the part most people never see, because they break the pattern too early. They reach out before the silence has time to become real. They interrupt the discomfort before it has time to turn into recognition. They give one more explanation, one more check-in, one more offering of emotional labor to someone who is only capable of missing them when access is no longer automatic. And yes, sometimes that is when the avoidant starts circling back. Not always with grand declarations, sometimes with something small. A casual message that pretends nothing happened, a random reaction to your story, a song, a memory, a half-hearted excuse. Sometimes they come back light, because they are testing whether the old dynamic is still available, whether you are still emotionally open, still easy to reach, still willing to carry the intimacy for both of you. And if you respond from the old wound, if you rush in with relief, if you hand them your availability before they have earned access to it, the entire pattern resets. That is why your silence must mean something, not emptiness. Standards. You have to understand the difference between being missed and being valued. An avoidant can miss you deeply and still not be ready to love you well. They can feel your absence and still repeat the same pattern if nothing fundamental has changed inside them. Missing you is emotional. Valuing you is behavioral. Missing you lives in thought. Valuing you lives in action. Do not confuse longing with capacity. That confusion has broken more hearts than rejection ever did. Picture it clearly. They are alone at night. Your name crosses their mind in the quiet. They remember the way you understood things they could never explain. They miss the comfort of your presence, the emotional steadiness you brought, the tenderness they never knew how to receive without resisting. But then, the old wiring returns. Vulnerability feels dangerous again. Reaching out feels risky. Accountability feels heavy. So they come close just enough to feel connected, then back away the second real intimacy is required. That is not love in action. That is fear wearing love's face. And if you are not careful, you will spend months trying to decode someone who has already shown you the pattern. Here is the warning. If they return and you have not changed, the pain will deepen. Because the second round is rarely just confusing. It is humiliating. Not because you are foolish, but because now your soul knows what your mind keeps negotiating with. You will hear yourself saying, "Maybe this time it will be different," while your body tightens at every delayed reply. You will smile at the screen while your stomach drops. You will call it patience while your intuition starts going numb. Do not go back as the version of you who was willing to be chosen in fragments. Do not return to the altar where you kept sacrificing your peace to prove your loyalty. If they come back, they must meet someone new. Someone whose care is no longer desperate. Someone whose empathy is not self-erasure. Someone who can look at deep chemistry and still ask, "Is this safe for me?" That is the real power shift. Not getting them to chase, not watching them obsess, not finally becoming the one who has emotional control over the other person. That is still the same game, just with the roles reversed. Real power is when their return is no longer the event that decides your worth for the day. Real power is when you stop measuring love by how hard someone is to reach. Real power is when your nervous system no longer confuses unpredictability with depth. And something strange happens when you reach that point. You become difficult to manipulate without trying to be. Your energy changes. Your pace changes. The way you respond changes. You no longer over-explain. You no longer perform understanding at the expense of truth. You no longer rush to soothe someone who destabilizes you. And because you are no longer available to the old emotional economy, they feel it. Even if they never admit it, they feel that the version of you they could once lean on without commitment is gone. That is often when obsession appears, not because you became colder, but because you became whole. They start wondering who has your attention now. They start replaying conversations they once dismissed. They begin feeling the emotional gravity they escaped by keeping you in pursuit. They notice your absence in ordinary moments. They compare. They idealize. They romanticize what they had access to and failed to honor. And for the first time, the control they once felt through distance slips through their fingers. But listen carefully. This moment is not your destination. It is a test. Because when someone who once withheld begins leaning in, the old wound inside you may light up and whisper, "See? I knew they cared. I just had to endure enough pain to prove I was worth loving." No, you were always worth loving. Their delay did not create your value. Their confusion did not define your beauty. Their fear did not lower your truth. The lesson was never that you had to become less emotional, less expressive, less needy, less human to be lovable. The lesson was that your heart was never meant to beg for safety in a place that could only offer intensity. That distinction matters, because intensity can feel sacred when you have been starved for consistency. But healing teaches you a different language. It teaches you that peace is not boring, that clarity is not lack of passion, that being treated well should not feel suspicious, that someone who truly has the capacity to love you will not make you decode your place in their life every week. And if an avoidant genuinely wants to meet you differently, they will not only say they miss you, they will tolerate the discomfort of closeness. They will stay present when intimacy activates them. They will take responsibility for the ways they shut down. They will learn to remain in the room emotionally instead of escaping every time the connection becomes real. That is growth. Anything less is nostalgia. So let this sink in slowly. The more an avoidant loves you, the worse they may sometimes treat you. Not because love is false, but because unhealed fear can distort the expression of real feeling. But your job is not to become an interpreter of distortion. Your job is not to stand in the fire and call it romance. Your job is not to keep translating their silence into proof that you matter. Your job is to become someone who no longer needs to be mistreated to feel chosen. Someone who can recognize longing without kneeling to it. Someone who can feel the ache and still not abandon themselves. Because in the end, the deepest shift is not that they come back. It is that you come back to yourself. You come back to the part of you that was exhausted from overgiving. You come back to the part of you that knew this hurt too much to be called love. You come back to the part of you that does not want to win someone's affection by surviving their confusion. And from that place, everything changes. Your standards stop sounding harsh to you. Your boundaries stop feeling cruel. Your silence stops feeling empty. It starts feeling holy. Because now it is no longer the silence of abandonment. It is the silence of self-return. The silence of a nervous system learning that it does not need chaos to feel alive. The silence of a heart that would rather be alone than emotionally rationed. The silence of someone who finally understands. Being deeply loved by a wounded person can still wound you, and your compassion does not require your captivity. Read that again in your soul. Your compassion does not require your captivity. You can understand them and still walk away. You can see their fear and still choose yourself. You can know they cared and still refuse the way they handled that care. That is not bitterness. That is maturity. That is self-respect. That is freedom. And once you taste that freedom, really taste it, something irreversible happens. You stop craving love that arrives wrapped in confusion. You stop collapsing when someone withdraws. You stop bargaining with silence. You stop calling emotional unavailability mysterious. You see it for what it is: a wound, a defense, a limit, not your destiny. So if this story is yours, let tonight be the night you stop chasing the proof. Let tonight be the night you stop offering your softness to people who only know how to hold it when it is slipping away.